yet, but
Okay, I think we are. I think we're live. Yeah. All right, welcome back everyone to the FPL Script. A little bit late. We did miss one game week. I think both of us had a fair few commitments. And probably JD wouldn't have wanted to record anyways. Nah, I kid. But yeah, we're looking at game week 12. We did skip game week 11. This is an interesting juncture, I would say, because we have a swing in terms of a lot of key players that I think people are looking into who aren't, I guess, analytics focused specifically. So like a big, I guess, Chelsea swing, a lot of people wanting to move into players like Isak. And from an analytics point of view, I think there's like the niche question, of course, of like what we think about Solanke and things like that. So we'll deep dive into that, but I just thought it was quite an interesting juncture point. And of course, I think this is a popular wildcard window, given the narrative of the international break and just once again the Arsenal fixture swings as well, which I'm sure we love specifically. Just quickly recap my game week 11. I had a pretty average game week, a Bruno-less game week, I would say, where I was pretty much held up by the Salah captaincy. I think that was the only thing that went well for me. I did actually go into Wood, which I now end up regretting because of João Pedro being sort of around the corner. And that's really it. I mean, City defense continues to look poor, so suffered there. Son and Solanke blanking for Ipswich is just funny, I suppose. And a game week like that, I was also probably helped by that Cunha haul, but that was it. What about you, JD?
so as Fran already pointed out, it wasn't a great week by any standards, and good to be back, of course. There's no hiding from variance. Even if you don't record an episode, it still stares at you when you look at your points. So the worst thing is Holland went from 9 points to 5 right by the end of it.
That was crazy,
because
by the way.
Brighton scored 2 goals, and then Holland should have. I don't know. Maybe he should have gotten sent off, to be honest, because that was pretty unhinged. What he tried to do or did, or I don't know. Like he was pretty upset.
He's had a couple actions this season, like more than I can remember, I suppose.
The throwing the ball at Gabriel, I also think warranted maybe further action. But again, I also don't want to be that guy who's demanding the punishment for every single technical violation. Mm-hmm. But aside from that, I think the one that really sent me over the edge was Dallo substitution, 54th minute. That clean sheet was so nailed on. I mean, everyone could see that. It was just horrible. And as he was struggling so badly against Fatawu, I just knew it because there was no other way.
So was Fatawu apparently, because he's broken his ACL.
Oh my god! That's crazy. Wow. So yeah, I mean, he did send Dallo into an early sub. So I could not care less after that point. So it took me a week and a half to really get over it. And by the time I came back, people had already moved on to a new platform, which was also a very, very strange thing to come back to. But yeah, more on that as we go.
Yeah, I did cross post, I suppose, this tweet of the stream on both platforms, but I can see myself, I think, definitely moving towards Blue Sky going forwards. If that's where the conversation is really. I ended up, I guess, small tangent on Twitter, just ended up staying on following for a long time. And I haven't enjoyed any of Elon's posts, if I can be honest. But yeah, if we're gonna all move to Blue Sky, I think fine with me. On Dallo, I don't know if I want to. I did totally feel like I was standing on the graveyard of some Dallo owners. But I feel like the future looks bright, right? The next 2 game weeks are good under Amorim. We'll talk about Amorim and xMins, but yeah, I did. I'm not even joking, but I think when I was sort of approaching the solve of Dallo, I did find, and this is interesting over the next 3 game weeks as well, right? I'm someone who I would say has a pretty poor defense over this run, generally speaking. So that's why even as of last game week, I was looking at potentially a defender transfer. And arguably, I guess if I went Dallo, I would have been equally upset, but then I probably would also be happy about theoretically what his mins would be like over the next 2. But yeah, I was concerned about that random Europa League sub that Ruud pulled off for Dallo, and I just thought could happen again under Rude specifically. But I felt, yeah, his minutes under Amram were more than likely going to be fine. But that's the brutal game.
So, I had a question for you before we move on, which is, so it's a stark contrast to Gameweek 10 where you
Yeah.
literally did the moves in front of me. I actually didn't even know that you bought Chris Wood before you posted it.
Yeah, that's true.
So what was the reasoning behind that? What, I mean, forget about everything that has happened after that, but
Yeah.
at that point in time.
I think I mean, Wood was still like amongst some of my review solves. It wasn't like something that was, I guess, purely market driven, but I just had a hard time reconciling how good his odds were, and I could see like some other models. Like I think when I was looking at Elevenify's, when he was sort of doing his model update, the baselines for Wood seemed like they were pretty nuts, to be quite honest. And I just had a hard time reconciling, if I had the opportunity to go Wood from Calvert-Lewin, that it would be a bad idea on a game week like a Newcastle at home game. And because I have Rodgers in my team, I don't know if you've seen the rotation, but yeah, like you can basically just rotate Wood and Rodgers perfectly over this run for like home games until Wood effectively comes out of the woods and has decent fixtures again. Now, I think the issue is always just going to be João Pedro, and I felt like I was uncomfortable approaching moves in the forward position because of uncertainty around João Pedro. And now, obviously, I think looking back, it was a pretty idiotic move, with João Pedro being a transfer that a lot of people will look to. But I suppose there's always going to be that element of, I don't know, maybe João Pedro could get re-injured or something. But this can also be considered as copium as well. I just thought that Wood seemed like a solid option. And I'd probably, like, worst case, and what I'm dealing with now is like, if I'm thinking about plans to go to João Pedro, arguably all three of my forwards can still be players that I can move out, João Pedro. But yeah, I guess it was really just that sort of baseline update on Wood made me pretty scared that I was missing out on someone quite good. But his effective ownership is also sky high. So looking back, it probably wasn't the most solid of moves. And it also has sort of closed me off from Solanke to Isak, even though I'm not sure if I would have done the move necessarily this week anyways, but I also probably was super drawn towards Santa Saka, and I didn't think that Saka, I guess, would be precluded from me as a transfer option now, and so it looks a little bit worse, because I think if I went 2 game weeks back, I couldn't, for example, pull off a double move like Solanke to Isak and Santa Saka at the same time, right? I couldn't have afforded that. So I didn't even think about the need to, save 2 free transfers so I can make both moves, because it just wasn't plausible. But now when I look at it, Santa Saka is not really a move I want to make, and arguably, I guess if I had more money in the bank, I would have loved to make the alternative move. But that's, we just move on, I suppose. But I don't know. Any thoughts you have on that, I guess?
No, I mean, like you said, I think you are the one judging your move quite harshly. Based on the data that was available at the time, I don't think it was a bad move necessarily. My only concern always is going into international break with 1 free transfer. So I don't know if that was a consideration for you.
I also don't really believe like international breaks are that real, because for me, I still see them as like a midweek game. And this was an interesting international break as well. Like I felt like almost all the top players didn't go, or
came out unscathed.
Only played 1 game of football. So a bit of a weird one for sure.
So you're saying Trent is not a top player?
Well, I mean, he was injured before the international break, I suppose.
He was.
So it wasn't an international break injury. There you go.
Fair enough. Because see, and this is why I would deter people from practicing Schadenfreude. It's the match was on pretty late, and the Trent injury happened quite early on in the game.
All right.
And that just meant my killer clean sheet would be almost 100%, ignoring the Van Dijk and Konate owners. So let's say 80 to 90%. I was thinking, okay, great, that's a great outcome. And then Salah had assisted by then, I think, for the first goal, which was the accidental touch and all of that. So I was thinking, okay, fine, one assist, we'll take that. Half time, I went to sleep. I woke up. Of course, Salah scored the second goal and got 3 bonus points.
Yeah, so that was a brutal swing.
Be very careful when practicing Schadenfreude because it's a really double-edged sword.
All right. We're going to quickly look at a brief sort of review solve with 100 in the bank. So this obviously a solve using FPL review sort of default values. You can have a look at FPL review and the Patreon as well if you want to have a look at running solves, looking at expected points, etc. We're not going to share the EV, of course, but the solve is an interesting one because I've seen a couple of Raya solves throughout the week. Somehow Flecken is on this solve. I don't quite know how, and so is Lewis as well. Can you max my screen, JD? Is that you to me?
Yeah. I didn't want to interrupt you, but
oh no,
yeah,
sorry
I
about
can't
that.
see the
Yeah.
team properly.
No,
Yeah.
so
Thank you.
What is wrong? I don't actually know what's going on with the solve, but it has Porro, has Trent, has Lewis, has Dalla, has Dunk. I guess this can't be possible. This must be like one of our old solves. What's happened here?
It has to be.
Okay, we have absolutely bottled it, or maybe I've bottled it. Let me go and
No, I'm happy to take responsibility, shared responsibility. It is our podcast after all.
This is on me. What a mishap. Let me just pull in an actual draft.
The best thing is you realize it pretty early on, so we're good.
I realized it early on, but then I just wanted I wanted to believe that it was
you
real.
tried to justify it.
I was like, sure. I guess Trent will play. Okay. But yeah, do have a look at FPL review for actual accurate solves. And not on FPL scripts. But no, the solve is Gabriel, Anderson, Dean, Duran Timber, Dunk, Raya, Fabianski. So obviously, like, pretty broken. Keep preparing for now. In the midfield, Salah, Palmer, Mbumo, Semenyo, Bruno, and then in the front line, Isak, João Pedro, Raul. I guess starting from defense, like triple Arsenal is pretty nuts. I guess that does close you off from Saka and Odegaard in the future, but it also just, I think, probably looks at Saka going forwards and just thinks that you can persist in the midfield without someone like him. And presumably Mbumo will leave your team when the Brentford fixtures get tougher. But I suppose Review just really thinks that Eze is someone that would just come right into your team, I would say. Meanwhile, there's a lot of value, I guess, to be earned from Arsenal defense, which is probably why so many of us are now considering these types of moves, right? Like one more move into an Arsenal defender if possible. And we can see also no Man City as well in the draft. Anderson, a very cheap option. Dunk as well. These are players who are now sub 4.5 and still, I think, good value in terms of the quality of the defenses that they play for. Fabianski really just is a cheat code. I'm so upset about that clean sheet as well, but good for those owners. Palmer, Salah, I guess the core of this draft, right? But this is not too expensive a draft. I guess it's more so the fact that you have Isak and Bruno, who are staple coins almost in this draft. These are players who probably won't have to leave your team, and I guess we can jump into that discussion of Isak for Solanke as well, if you want to here or later on in xMins.
Yeah, we could probably discuss that in xMins. With this draft, I think one of the most surprising picks is Semenyo because of how seemingly underrated he was by review, I would say, compared to market odds at least.
I think that's fair.
So it's great to see that perhaps his baselines have updated, and it just reflects on his baselines as well as the fact that they have good fixtures coming up. So if someone has persisted with him, that's great. You've probably saved yourself the free transfer. And with João Pedro, I just think the fact that he already scored and he's back in full training, potentially, like you said, there's always that copium of him getting re-injured. But from what we have available, I just think it's pretty good minutes and with 10 share, it's almost he is almost cracked as an asset. So I don't know how to get to him. Honestly, I guess selling Holland would be the only option, and at this rate, it could be called an upgrade. Going Holland to João Pedro, I'm just kidding. But I don't see any other way to go to Bruno, for example, like doing, let's say, Brennan Johnson to Bruno in my case. But maybe there's other price points to consider. But again, from a price point consideration, this is a pretty robust draft because you can easily downgrade from Palmer to Saka, like you said. But triple Arsenal defense, you would have to get one of those players out. I'm assuming Timber in a couple of weeks' time when, let's say, Calafiori, possibly White, although that seems to be less likely. And if one of the other defenders is back, you can potentially sell him and then look at Saka or Odegaard. But yeah, I could not fault this draft honestly. It looks so good.
Yeah, I would love to go for a draft like this because it's like no one's gonna own triple Arsenal defense, so it's like just a lot of differential
100%.
EV. And yeah, even within my own team, I can't access Bruno and Isak, and it's one of those things where this is such a good game week for both of these players, but also it's one of those game weeks where if you aren't going for these players now, I do think that the next time to own them could be a few weeks down the line. Like Isak will still have a tough game like Liverpool, Bruno still has Arsenal and Man City. So it's not like necessarily these players are, I guess, essential per se, but it's just this is still a great time to own these players and enjoy the EV for the good games since you have this sort of wild card, flexibility. And Palmer and Salah, as we know, have been great. Salah's baselines have also moved up a lot, as far as I can see. The market odds have also shot up quite a fair bit. I don't think it's sort of because his underlyings have gotten too much better, but maybe at the start of the season, it could have been the case that, we were talking about things like, I guess, aging and sort of profiling how a player sort of manages, a new season. And he hasn't really dropped off too much. I think his baselines have really moved in line with how Liverpool's attack has moved from an XG point of view, as opposed to like he's gotten significantly worse as a player. And that's probably that sort of U-turn in terms of how we've interpreted him, I guess, from a modeling point of view. Whereas Palmer, we know he's had a noticeable increase, I guess, again, from our initial season expectations. So, yeah. And I think Brighton being so good, João Pedro was always, I think, a review darling, but I'm actually seeing a lot of love for him in market odds as well. Which I think we've there's probably still a bit of a gap there, but it's just how good the baselines are. That looks really promising. So yeah, really lovely draft.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can explore how things have changed with respect to market versus odds next week. MD versus odds next week, because I am still gathering the data. I just didn't have it to present here for everyone.
All right, awesome. Shall we jump into xMins then?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a bunch of talking points, and maybe we can go through that. The first point is obviously Amorim's setup at Man United.
Well, yeah, I mean, me as the resident United fan, as my YouTube comment chat would say when I say that Bruno's still a good FPL pick. No, but I mean, serious. I mean, as a non-fan, I guess, we know that he will probably play a 3-back. I think we've already seen that in training, right? So
yeah.
It's just about how he's going to utilize those fullbacks. I'm not sure if the quote was correct, but it seems like he's already mentioned that wingbacks are probably initially more suited to playing in the wingback positions, and then wingers.
No, fullbacks.
Yeah.
But you're right about the quote. So it's fullbacks initially, and yeah, you're right.
And yeah, I mean, wingers, I guess, can come in and learn after they probably understand, what to do on and off the ball from a defensive point of view. So that's a positive, I would say, for people who've actually moved into both Dalot and Mazraoui. Although maybe if you'd like to speak on, I guess, how fast you think Shaw and Malacia can be integrated. But that's for me, that's a positive in the interim, because really you want Dalot and Mazraoui to play the next 2 game weeks. It seems pretty plausible that they could both play the games. And because I still think it'll take some time for Shaw and Malacia to integrate. And if you're giving a little bit more time for wingers to sort of integrate, that's going to take even more time too. As far as, let's say, the attackers, I mean, the setup, if we say 3-4-3, could be something like maybe Ahmad and Bruno as twin 10s potentially. Arguably, in some cases, you can have Bruno playing a little bit deeper, but then having a little bit more of a flexible role. But I'd say maybe those two, or then up top, obviously, like Garnacho and Rashford can easily play as well in that sort of spot that I've designated for Ahmad. But then, yeah, you have 2 other sort of midfielders as well. And the back 3, I still think is super open, because we don't really know how fit Euro is. And we have yet to see, what he feels about someone like Delict and etc. We have Lindelof in the squad too, things like that. So I think those kind of spots are still super open into interpretation, but it doesn't have an impact on FPL. I don't think there's going to be any significant impacts for Bruno. Even if United were to get a lot better, I find it that maybe Bruno could be a player that could still stay relatively similar as a pick in terms of his value. I don't know if you think, because some people have been sort of postulating that Bruno is someone who's going to like improve tremendously as an FPL asset. I don't know if you have any thoughts though. On all the points mentioned, maybe.
Yeah, so I'm glad you sort of went point by point because it's easier to keep track of what we need to discuss. So, firstly, starting with the roles, I would point to two players or perhaps three players in the Sporting CP system. One is Nuno Santos, who plays left wing back right now, but I think he used to be a winger.
Yeah, he was. I
So
actually
that's
googled
yeah.
that.
So that's a converted winger to a wing back.
Mm-hmm.
The second is Pedro Gonçalves, who played a little bit in the 4 of the 3-4-2-1 and also in the 2 of the 3-4-2-1 alongside Trincao. So, and Trincao himself. So, like you said, I think Bruno and Ahmad should be the ideal two in the 3-4-2-1. But I don't know if he's going to use that or he's going to use someone like Rashford to begin with and and sort of train him into that role. But the thing is, and everyone knows this, that the more your age is, it's more difficult to sort of retrain your mind. Forget about the body, but it's also very hard to retrain your mind to sort of focus on different responsibilities. So I don't know how much Rashford is going to be successful. I definitely think Garnacho as a left wing back is potentially going to be
Yeah, I do think that's
the way
possible.
forward in the future. I don't know how soon that will be. Like you said, Shaw Malasia being there for now. Shaw, I mean, I'm just going to ignore Shaw for now because if he plays left wing back, he's going to get injured again. There's just no doubt in my mind.
True.
The workload is tremendous in that system. So let's assume Malasia, who is fit. I think this is a great season for him to play in cup competitions, just because he's never had great minutes or consistent minutes for United. And for example, the Bodo Glimt game, which is the Europa League game on Thursday, is a great way for him to get minutes again. So I'm thinking this week, you're right. Dalot and Mazraoui are pretty much safe, I think, and that's what I've predicted as well for both of them to start. And Martinez and Lindelof both withdrew from the respective squads during the international break. So I'm assuming those are IB injuries and uh, not necessarily a reflection on their injury status. So I'm thinking MDL, Matthias de Ligt, Martinez, and potentially Mazraoui and Dalot. All four could be nailed for at least the next 2 weeks, and we'll find out everything else. Because the thing is, we've drawn 3 games in Europa, so it's not like we have a mandate to do whatever we want in Europa League. We need to win every single game. So I that makes it a little bit more difficult for me because if it were a case of okay, play the B team in Europe and play the A team in the Premier League, it would be much more easier to predict what the lineups would be. So this week is completely up in the air. I don't think I'll get 7 or 8 out of 11, but if I get more than yeah, I'll claim it all all to be a part of my skill and not luck.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the interesting thing with like the minutes in sporting that I was looking into, like when I was thinking about buying Dallo, is just yeah, like ultimately he's converted a lot of wingers, like the super kid like Chenda, and even like that I think
Oh,
like
Quenda, yes,
Maximilian
yes.
Araujo guy, like he's also a winger too.
Araujo,
So
yep,
yeah, like
yep.
at the
He
end of the
scored
day,
in the previous game week, yeah.
all these players seem like they can be played, and I feel like yeah, of course, there's going to be some element of I guess training, and none of these players have had like a preseason, for example, under him. So fine, that's a fair point, but ultimately the minutes can be like pretty shaky, and we probably won't be touching United players up until 17. Like the only player we can really trust, I would still say, is maybe a fullback if you really want to go there. But you're still making the bet that that player, I guess, has great minutes, and eventually, I guess Dallo and Mazraoui should be fighting for minutes between each other, I suppose. Um, do you think that that's the case?
So the only realistic, not a realistic scenario, but let's say one of the only plausible scenarios where they both play good minutes is Mazarawi plays a right center back and Dalot plays a right wing back,
Mm-hmm.
and they sort of alternate, I guess, depending on who's more tired and who can venture more forward.
Yeah.
But it seems like a pipe dream, honestly, because we have so many center backs competing
That's what I was
for
thinking.
the three spots. So I mean, and look, Evans has not done a bad job, right? I don't think anyone can tell me that Evans has been terrible in any of the games that he's played. Even against City, I don't think he was that. He was the bad centre back when we lost 3-1 to when Rashford opened the scoring. So it, it's very difficult to see that version of Mazraoui RCB and Dalot RWB materializing, but the first few weeks should give us an indication. But like you said, I would not buy any United asset other than Bruno or Onana. Those are the
That's
only
true.
two players
Sorry.
I think.
Yeah, I actually forgot about
Yeah,
that one.
yeah, yeah.
As far as Spurs, I didn't think there were too many talking points, right? Obviously, their defense isn't going to look good this weekend.
Yeah.
We know Van de Ven. I mean, the discussion point of Van de Ven's interesting because it does seem like he's probably out for maybe even another game week. Just sort of listening into what Ange is saying. I mean, there's clearly a desire to protect the player, and he wants to play, but that's besides the point. Romero looks completely cooked, and I think he still went on international duty, so there you go. But Son played quite a fair few minutes in international break, but his minutes should be perfect.
Yes.
There's just way too many injuries in the squad right now. The squad plays itself. I think the only thing is like, okay, Bentancur is out for racism, and Bissouma is basically going to slot in. I still think Madison's probably trying to reclaim his spot in the team, but I don't think he necessarily starts per se. And Johnson should still have really good minutes. So I think that feels pretty clear cut. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, yeah, completely agree. I don't think I have anything to add.
Great. What do you think about City then? I guess, we have the news that Kovacic is out. Another point to mention is that Stones has trained, Manuel Akanji has trained, Ake has just rejoined training, so we'll see how he integrates. It might be the case that he's still feeling in pain, so maybe he doesn't play. Guardiola, as far as I understand, is fine. No one else was mentioned in Pep's presser, but he has lied already once this season, which I actually thought we were starting to get a very good iteration of Pep, but then I think 2-3 weeks ago he just completely slapped me with a Walker start from.
Oh yeah, same here.
He was
I mean,
out, so
that was
that's plausible that Pep could still be hiding some cards in terms of injuries, but I guess hopefully he's got mostly a good squad available because he was quite forthright with the Kovacic injury, right? So I don't know. What do you think about that impact on the City minutes?
like you said, completely blindsided by that benching. And Rico Lewis will always sub on, so there's no chance of getting an auto sub.
Yeah.
When Rico Lewis is benched, and again, I don't know why I decided to trust him for once in my life, but that was just a good lesson that I should never trust Pep. With Rico Lewis's minutes, I just feel Kovacic being out may not impact his minutes as much as people want, but I think there should be some impact because Pep has been adamant enough to keep shoehorning Gundogan in as much as he can, even though it is evident that he's completely washed. It's so beyond ridiculous at this point. And look, of course, he knows like a million times more than me. So I'm not the only guy here, but you can just see it. I don't know. There's something behind the scenes where perhaps no other player is willing to follow his directions as much as Gundogan, and there's that trust from when he was at City before. So I don't know. Maybe it's some of that, but I just feel if you own Rico Lewis and you don't want you can afford to absorb the price drop. Like for example, I think he is predicted to drop in price tonight. So you could potentially keep him, I think. And like Fran said, if you're on wildcard, you will definitely not have any City players. But if you are not on wildcard, like the two of us, I don't think you have the luxury, or you should not have the luxury to transfer out Rico Lewis this week. You should just play him, I think.
Yeah, it's a weird one, I guess, because I think some people could do it, but you're probably trading in someone who You really need their minutes guaranteed. Probably rotates a bit better than Rico right now. The way that I've managed Rico is I think I sort of went by the way Luke almost iterated on how the minutes should be played a couple weeks ago. But I think like that sort of base thought of, are there games where he looks guaranteed to play right back? I think is quite key, because when you look at the Man City fixtures, they play Feyenoord after this game, then they play Liverpool. So like when you look at sort of rotation around that, it's pretty clear that like this is still going to be a Walker game. The UCL game is a Rico game. The Liverpool game is a Walker game. And actually, there's only a 3-day turnaround before they play Nottingham Forest at home, which I think is so clearly at that point going to be a Lewis game as long as he's fit. And
Yes.
he's probably stayed fit more than any other player in the team. So I think, once you probably adjust the minutes there, and maybe if it's still the case that you're asked to sell, I think sell. But I have someone like Leif Davis in my team who probably isn't super valuable in the grand scheme of things. So I guess I have the luxury, whatever that means, of keeping this gratefully good Man City defense, and the double up of the Rico Lewis and Guardiola stays alive. But I won't be playing Lewis this week. I feel I still might be benching him because, as I said, can't really guarantee that he starts. We could still see Gundo 6. And I mean, like we can say that players are washed and players are, but like those washed players are sadly still playing. So I can't really do
Yeah,
much about
exactly.
it.
Exactly. You're
Yeah.
spot on there.
On Brighton, I think just an update for people. Dunk.
Yeah.
Dunk was there was an image on training, I think, circulated on Monday. I don't think that's necessarily Dunk. Most people's thoughts, I believe, on Dunk are that if he's fit or close to fit, let's say, he should be starting. But I think he should be guaranteed for that Southampton game. Maybe this game week is still a week too soon. From listening to Fabian's comments today. So I think someone like, for example, FPL Instinctive, and have a look, of course, at his own Substack for like detailed thoughts on the lineup. But I think he's predicted, for example, someone like Dunk to be out for this game week. On Welbeck and JP, I think the more interesting topic is going to be how are you solving with JP, and how are you managing JP week to week in terms of the minutes, and then what do you think about Welbeck? Because I wanted to jump into a separate discussion in terms of penalty share right after we discuss JP and when we jump into Welbeck.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing with managing, to the point about Rico Lewis as well as Joao Pedro, I feel like people need to be more adventurous in terms of the minutes where you adjust them wherever you feel like they will play or not play. Whatever is your perception of, let's say, whenever the turnaround is too quick, maybe Joao Pedro could get rested. I don't know. I'm just giving an example. Or he gets less minutes, and then someone like Router can sub in earlier, or Welbeck plays more minutes. Because right now it seems like Welbeck is going to play more minutes, at least in the short term. And then we don't know if Joao Pedro can prove his fitness. Then I guess it's up for grabs. But review is for a lot of my solves recommending Welbeck to me. So I guess it's a question of if you think Joao Pedro has good minutes, then Welbeck's pen share should probably go down to close to zero, and maybe you need to adjust the minutes to account for that. So there's some work to be done there. If the solver recommends Welbeck, in most people's cases, I don't think the solver is going to recommend Welbeck, so they're probably okay. So in my case, it's because of Chris Wood, because Chris Wood plays Arsenal, so the solver wants to move on to Welbeck this week. But if you don't own Chris Wood, then I guess your striker has a better fixture, or a much better fixture, I would say.
Yeah. The Welbeck one is, it's just super interesting one, because you're right. His pen share is like in the 0.4 territory, and we have this case in review where the availability, if you add all the penalty takers within a certain team, is above 100%. So, I don't know how you think. I suppose that does spill over to slightly incorrect EV, right, for certain players. Is that sort of your position, or do you think there's like self-correcting stuff within, I guess, the minutes and the availability that ultimately sort of means the pen share is a bit void?
This is a very interesting thing for two reasons. One is review gives users control of minutes, right? And so I think because of that, there's a very big distinction between what is someone like review does and what someone like I.
Mm-hmm.
Because what, like for example, I also have given users a handle on adjusting xMins into a model, but it's to a much lesser extent, I would say. I have certain pen shares fixed and certain data behind the scenes is sort of fixed or tied to minutes, but the pen share does not fluctuate. With review, what I feel is, for example, let's say Saka's availability is going to be 50%. So if you adjust his minutes down to let's say 60, that automatically means that even if Saka has 100% pen share, it's 100% pen share for only 50% of the game time. And so what happens is there's this big void of actual pen share which is missing. And I think because all of these relations are non-linear, I think the review has to bake in certain penalty percentages for other players as well, regardless of whether Saka is going to play or not. So I just feel like that's why you have someone like Odegaard at 32% and Havertz at 10%. Even though I wholeheartedly disagree with the Havertz pen share now,
Mm-hmm.
I've in my UCL model I've put it down to zero, or not zero
Is that
exactly.
because of
That's
the Trossard take?
yeah, that was too much for me because I didn't own him obviously, but
Fair.
he was playing Shakhtar Donetsk and he was like the second highest projected EV for that game week or on that day, and I mean Arsenal got a penalty. He was supposed to be the primary penalty taker and he didn't take the penalty. So it's just I don't trust him at all to take a penalty for Arsenal. Maybe if Trossard is not on the pitch, it's a different issue. I don't know, but I would just rather not have any pension to him just because that would then boost his EV and then perhaps he would get into our teams because of that. And that is, I think, false representation of what his actual EV might be.
Yeah, no, I mean it's fair. It's an interesting one because I think Havertz is someone who's had some nice market odds for a bit, right? But I think there's always a mix of like, I feel like the positional share element has probably gone. So the fact that that's still sort of residual is an interesting, I guess, piece. But yeah, I think definitely on the penalty bit. At the end of the day, we're talking very very small amounts of EV, I guess, for most players. But it's a good point. I think when someone like Welbeck has such good minutes, has like 0.4 pen share, that is quite additive. And when you look at, for example, someone like Chris
Yes.
Wood, to me he's a 100% penalty taker. So if JP's like penalty share is like 100%, I can't see why Chris Wood, for example, doesn't have 100% penalty share. And those are all those sort of like micro adjustments that like we play with week to week. So, but just something for, I guess, people to play in mind. We've always said it's always going to be team dependent, right? Because we expect generally, I think, less penalties for teams over the course of the season. I do remember Vic circulating what Simon had projected as like penalties for the season for most teams. I imagine we can get some sort of update on that at some point this season. Maybe I can even ask Simon on that. But it's I mean, like we all care about these like margins, so why not think about it at least. As far as Brentford, probably not much to say on this team. I mean, Wisa was probably the only player I wanted to discuss, not from an xMins point of view, but I mean, he's had absolutely ridiculous underlying stats, like clearly almost overperforming in terms of underlyings, right? Because it's like you can't.
That's a great way of
you can't be
it,
doing this week to week when Brentford are a good offense, but ultimately shouldn't be that, or shouldn't have a player central to the team that is, I guess, that good on attack. I don't know if you have any thoughts on Wisa and his sort of beautiful start to the season.
Visa is a great example, and so is Nico Jackson, right? Where their underlines are tremendous, and the problem is, do you trust the current underlines or do you trust, let's say, the last 4 seasons worth data?
Yeah,
which is probably trending in that direction, but not as aggressively.
true.
So it's just a case of that, and it was Lorks, I think, on Twitter who pointed this out that Nico Jackson's baselines, if you compute via, let's say, the next 8 weeks projections for review, are not matching up at all to what he is actually putting up per 90. So that just made me think. Uh, it's not that I don't think review is yet to adjust. I believe review will continue to adjust as the game weeks go on.
Yeah.
I just feel like I still don't trust the 11 game example for both Nico Jackson and Visa.
Yeah, and obviously Wisa's played a fair few less games as well with his injury. So
absolutely. So maybe it's unfair to club them both in the same category. I just wanted to illustrate how having tremendous underlines is still not like the final. It's not the final stamp on great EV, because, like you said, Visa has fine EV, right? But it's not tremendous. It's not like a game. It's not like great game breaking EV.
Yeah.
Like a Momo, for example, and that's largely down to Penshare as well, and perhaps units and secure role and stuff like that. We are all of us are speculating on what review has under the hood. So yeah, we'll keep an eye on Visa's underlines. If they continue to persist, I will have to eat my words.
Yeah, no, I mean same here, to be honest, because he's someone that I'm sort of blocked from anyways, but he's obviously just had such a brilliant start. I know Igor Thiago's close to coming back, I suppose, so maybe that will have a slight impact on him, but we also know just the bigger impact is like that run of games for Brentford. And if more than anything, a lot of us are planning sales of even someone like Mbumo on 14 or 17. So I can't see us owning Wisa, but I'm sure, yeah, we can continue to sort of track his performance, which I find interesting. Because on the flip side, you have someone like Buonanotte as well, right? Who he's like had brilliant numbers this season. But I feel like every time I've had a look at his EV on review, I'm extremely disappointed at him. And he's a weird one because he's an extremely young player. So I feel like it goes back to that discussion with Morgan Rogers at the start of the season where we just don't really know how to project someone who's like, I guess, young and developing, right? And where they'll eventually get to. But those are the types of players that I think maybe we can actually produce something like that, like just see maybe not share the XG, I suppose, for models per se, but then I wonder if we could still see whether there's a substantial gap, because I think what Lorx identified was pretty interesting.
Yes. No, you're right. Rather than sharing numbers, or rather raw numbers,
yeah,
like we do for market odds versus MD, we can share what is the disparity between XGI per 90 or npxG per 90. And that is interesting, right? Because, for example, Buonanotte as well as Visa, let's say, and Nico Jackson, for the sake of completeness, none of these players have penalties.
Yeah.
So all of their projected XG is npxG, which makes it even easier for us to do this sort of exercise. So that's something that I'll track for the next week. Let's see if we can come up with a graphic for that.
All right, sounds good. Chelsea, I don't think there's too much news there. I think Reece James is out. I think it just does bring into question whether you can consider someone like Malo Gusto, but it didn't seem like Enzo said that the Reece James injury is that significant, but it is a hamstring injury. It takes a while. I think every time you have an injury like that, you're just going to be eased back in. And over this tough schedule, I'm sure Gusto's going to get most of the minutes, but we've also seen if Reece is available, like that could still mean taking Gusto off at 45 minutes. That can still mean taking Gusto off at 70, which sometimes is ideal in terms of securing a clean sheet, but probably doesn't give you that sort of safety net. So I think Colwill probably ultimately is the best option there. Chelsea's a pretty boring team to get into, I guess, because I feel like it is Sanchez, Colwill who are dull picks, I would say, and then Jackson and Palmer. And Jackson is an interesting pick for sure. But there's a lot of good competitive forwards around that price point that a lot of people have to make decisions between. And obviously on a game week like this, you're driven first towards Isak, and then anyone else probably comes and pales in comparison. Liverpool.
Yeah, and one last thing on the right back spot. So even Tosin has played there. True. So it's not even that if Reece James is out, Gusto has to play. So, like you said, it's just Colville, Sanchez, or don't buy a
Yeah.
Chelsea defender
Although
or slash
I will
goalkeeper.
have to push that. I think it's so unlikely that someone will play right back, like to force Gusto out of the team. But Gusto is someone who is injury prone. I think we can say that. He
That's
has,
also a fair
yeah,
point.
he has
Yeah.
these niggling injuries, and I think that's where we've seen games where like Fofana's played or Tosin's played, or I think even we've seen Badiashile, or maybe not
Hmm.
Badiashile, but maybe it
Not,
was
not at
Badiashile.
fullbacks, but what really?
Yeah, I mean Gusto was out
That's
for a few
interesting.
games, and there have been some horrendous sort of center back like performances at the right back position this season. I just can't seem to remember who else has played. I think no, I think it was it was Disasi, and it was a disaster class.
Oh, disaster. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, 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 yeah,
but yeah,
yeah.
um, Liverpool, Alisson's close to coming back. Trent is
Yes.
out for this game week, confirmed. Not even in training as
Keller
well.
is
Yeah,
Keller is going to play this
that's
week,
nice for
and
you.
then not again. So I need that clean sheet more than I need nitrogen.
Which is extremely probable. So hopefully you do get that. Um, Chiesa, he doesn't seem.
No, so the only reason I wrote Chiesa was because just to illustrate the point that Salah's minutes have never been under threat and they will never be under threat. That's the only reason I wrote Chiesa.
Hey,
There's nothing else to talk
hey,
about.
don't shoot the messenger. I've only gotten good minutes from Salah ever.
Oh yeah. So Arsenal is interesting, right? Because Timber,
Yeah,
and that's an opportunity that if you're on wildcard or if you have luxury free transfers, you should definitely uh, try to invest in that spot. So I spoke about this briefly earlier, and maybe you wanted to talk about maybe some of the other options in that position. So realistically, do you think his spot or his place is not under threat for the time being, or let's
Timber.
say short to
I
mid-term?
feel like it. I think there's always the question to be asked, like of whether maybe Timber would still be preferred over Calafiori, because I guess he's still a little bit more disciplined for now, and maybe he
Hmm.
has left back minutes as well to his name. But yeah, with White being out for a while, it's Partey challenging that spot at right back. I think Partey is vastly inferior to him, um, and I think it probably would still make more sense to, I guess, rotate Timber in games that are less important, potentially like the Champions League games. I feel like over the previous years, we've seen Arteta definitely pay more care towards Premier League games. Now, part of this is because Arsenal haven't always been in the Champions League under his management, but I think when it comes to, let's say, group stage games, that's quite a big distinction from, or league phase games rather. There's quite a big distinction.
Hmm.
And Timber, as we know, the only issue with his minutes is actually himself, right? He is someone who, at around 75
Yes.
minutes, always cramps up, always like will find himself on the floor, and I think he just gets subbed off but plays the next game for roughly 75 or 90 if he can really do the whole thing. But yeah, this is going to be an extremely congested period. I think that if you're someone investing into Timber, you're probably still going to be, pushed by the confidence that Arsenal are going to try rotate, you know, around him. I don't think necessarily in the Premier League, so it probably means that you can enjoy him mostly within what you want, which is FPL. So I think Timber's actually a really solid pick. I'm actually with the fan team wildcard about to jump into Gabriel plus Timber myself. So there is some value, I guess, to always owning someone who's like, first of all, cheaper than Saliba, but potentially a little bit more interesting in open play.
Hmm.
Because it seems like this season has really taken a little bit of a beating towards players who don't do much in terms of like any sort of attacking returns. Because it's so rare to see someone hit the full jewels in terms of like pass completion and getting like triple bonus from that nowadays.
No, you're right about that actually, because the two changes, huge changes, which were shots on target and fouls drawn, have actually just benefited players who have more actions on the field.
Exactly.
And which means that, like you said, Timber, because he's more involved in open play, will naturally have more tendency or affinity towards bonus points compared to someone like Saliba, where you actually need the game to be dead or something like, Arsenal City 0-0, and then, okay, fine. There's a distinct possibility of Saliba getting 3 bonus points. But other than that, it's going to be really difficult for him to get anywhere near the bonus points, I feel.
Yeah, fully in agreement there. As far as Villa, it seems like Konsa's out, but Pau's fine, and Onana is out as well, if anyone actually really cares. But I guess that just impacts their setup in terms of midfield, because I think Kamara maybe should be able to play. I'm not sure, but I think he also had an injury recently too. So quite a fair few injuries there.
Wait, recently, as in he got re-injured
I
after
think
coming
so.
back?
Yeah, that's what I
Oh,
remember.
okay. That's unfortunate
Yeah, it
because he
definitely
had
is.
like a season-long injury. So yeah, hopefully it's not too bad.
But I think that's really it in terms of minutes. I did want to maybe touch on one last club, which would be Newcastle, because I did want
Hmm.
to talk on Lewis Hall. Because I mean, we're talking about, and actually no, as part of the discussion, I think we'll talk about Dean as well, because I think a lot of people are moving into defenders. If you go for Arsenal defenders, I think it's a lot more clear cut as to how to approach that. But then there is a lot of differentiation between like 4.9 and below defenders. Dean
Correct.
is definitely one of them. I don't know what your thoughts are on Dean, but it seems like he's not really like, it reminds me of like when Moreno was out dueling Dean in his like initial season, and it was near impossible for Dean to get minutes unless Moreno was injured. I feel like that is similar to Luka Dean's situation where he is
Dean and
clearly,
Matson,
yeah,
yeah.
getting the better of
Yeah.
Madsen. And you're only
Yep.
really going to see Dean off if Aston Villa are getting absolutely trounced. Because I feel like, and that's actually a bit of a positive now that I think about it, because it's like, I don't see Dean being subbed off pre 60 if things are going okay for the team. So yeah, ultimately, even if let's say Aston Villa would have lost a clean sheet, I mean that's it, right? For most defenders, your day is done. So I think actually from that context, if you have confidence in Dean in the medium to long term, he's actually quite a solid pick. But I still think Hall is more nailed and has more minutes. But Colwell's like basically the most basic CB, and clearly, as we discussed in this bonus system, isn't benefited really by all these changes, but will guarantee you probably every single last minute of Chelsea this season, except I think he's only missed 1 minute of football. So, yeah.
Hmm.
Any thoughts on these
With
types of players?
Yeah, with Lewis Hall, it's really weird. I was thinking so for example, you have Lloyd Kelly,
Yeah.
you have Sven Botman. I don't know when he's coming back,
He should be
and
back
Trippier.
next year, but that's a lot of games
Yeah.
until we get there.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah. Next year is just so far away right now. So let's forget about Botman. So Lloyd Kelly and Trippier,
Yeah.
and Trippier is close to return to play, right?
Mm-hmm.
From what uh, Eddie Howe said.
Yeah.
So if Trippier comes back to play right back, what does that mean for the left back spot? Is it going to be between Livramento and Hall? Is Hall clearly the first choice? I I don't know in that case, and
I
that is perhaps my only concern with
Yeah,
that.
I feel like Hall has completely won that spot, and there's no way that they'll use Livramento over him. Because I feel like Livramento has been
Okay,
playing well, but it's actually up to Trippier to sort of regain that spot. And for the most part, even from reading Newcastle fans and just sort of my own take on Hall, I just think Howe has tried enough of like, let's say like playing Livramento there, and
combinations, yeah,
yeah, and
yeah.
it's similar to your thoughts on Dallo, where okay, yeah, in theory he can play left back if need be, but I think there's absolutely no reason to do that. And I think Eddie
Hmm.
Howe is also a pretty big proponent of like playing his best starting 11, and Hall is in that. The only argument is yeah, Lloyd Kelly versus Dan Burn, but I mean you've seen the minutes for Hall recently, and they've been splendid basically.
Hmm.
So I just think things should remain the same even over a congested period, given his age. Up until, unfortunately, of course, we might have Botman coming into the team. At which point, then the age old question of does Dan Burn keep his spot no matter what will probably have to be answered. But I think we'll probably cross that bridge when we get there. I also wonder if, let's say, Hall and Livermento is something that Howe likes, right? Like that sort of pairing, because we've always sort of characterize the Trippier and Burn pairing as one, right? Like one sort of setup where Trippier gets a lot more license because of Dan Burn being in the side. So I don't know if that's also a pretty key thing too, but we only really need to ask that question, as I said, when Botman comes back. So I feel like Hall's minutes are safe, but there could be a surprise benchy, I'm sure. Although from what I've seen and what I've read, Hall's been absolutely brilliant so far.
Yeah, that's actually great insight because even though I have watched most of Newcastle's games, I never really focused on how Hall was playing because I just think as a team, their team strength was really going down the drain for the first few weeks,
But
and then
yeah,
it's
it's
sort
actually
of
U-turned, hasn't it? Yeah.
yeah, it has U-turned and I was going to say plateaued initially, and then it's now perhaps going back up to where people saw them at the start of the season. So fair enough. I think you, the thing is, I have no strong opinion. So if someone like you is has strong opinions on this, I'm more than happy to defer to what you're thinking.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I still think he's going to have worse minutes than Colwell, right? As an
Yeah,
example,
of
but
course,
that is like a
of
gold
course.
standard, and Colwell really does provide close to nothing on the pitch other than just set pieces, I guess. From or like the one long ball, I suppose, that he does possess. But
Hmm.
with Hall, I don't know if you've looked into it, but it seems like he's on quite a fair few set pieces as well. The only thing I'd say is, yeah, open play, it doesn't seem like either of the fullbacks are actually that contributory at all. It's not like they're hammering chances or hammering crosses in, that sort of thing. They clearly have a pretty defined role in the team, and
Yeah,
it's
I just think
yeah,
they're classic '90s fullbacks where your only job is to defend and I don't know help out your winger.
yeah.
So yeah, it's working for now. So maybe he's a good investment after all.
Yeah, I mean, I remember also looking at something from the transfer flow, just talking about how much Hall has improved, and how much he brings to the table. I mean, ultimately, he seems like everything Newcastle would have wanted spending that much money on him when I think a lot of people actually questioned the deal maybe 2 years ago. And
Yeah, no,
now,
that's fair.
yeah,
Also, I was thinking, last year, Howe was trying to pigeonhole him into, not pigeonhole him rather, and try him out in different positions like center mid as well. And I don't know, that just left me feeling lot more uncertain. But this season, it seems like it's one spot, and he's consistently getting minutes in that spot. So that's a big change from last season. So perhaps I need to update my beliefs.
yeah, it's interesting. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that was a pretty good discussion. I mean, how would Dean fit in there? I guess even like Dean and Hall, like, what do you kind of think? There's obviously a price gap as well, so I guess maybe a lot of the decisions would be spurred on by that first. But I don't know if you have any thoughts. Like, would you be comfortable going into Dean yourself?
So I gave this some thought yesterday, just because before I ran the solver, I wanted to check minutes on Aston Villa defenders,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, I don't know if I'm comfortable going into Dean just because here's my thought, which is sort of worst case scenario thought. Maybe that's not ever going to materialize, but all I'm thinking is there's so many games crammed into from now till the rest of the year that one, let's say, bad game or something like that, or one game where he's gassed, and then the next game it's ideal for Matsons to step in. And if your squad is robust, like if you have defenders to cover, that's great. You can easily go for someone like Dean. But for me, I'm thinking I don't know if my defense is going to be as robust as I think, just because I own Darrow, right? So there's the additional tax of owning someone like him. So for me, I don't think that's an option. But if someone has, let's say, four great xMins defenders, then maybe he is worth considering because you can sort of get an auto sub. I'm assuming if he doesn't start, he's not going to play.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. I think that always happens with defenders who are in that sort of territory where you're not like, oh well, like you're always gonna have to be open to the situation where this player could be benched. And I guess fortunately with the way that we tend to play, we have a fourth and fifth defender most weeks, unless that player is called Lewis Dunk. Um, so yeah, I mean, what can we say? I think
Yeah.
those are choices that most
Shall we,
managers have to just be open to. But
shall
shall
we
we
move on to
cover?
captaincy?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Captaincy is, I think tomorrow's Isak is here just for fun, but really it's between
Hmm.
Haaland, Salah, and Palmer. And for most of the international break, I would have said Salah was quite clearly the captain on default, but I think our main man Erling Haaland has slipped over into being the dominant captain, and maybe that's because of the unfortunate Spurs news that was obtained from Ange today. Any thoughts on that as a Haaland owner yourself?
So the sad part is the the news of Romero and Van der Ven being out was juxtaposed by Kovacic being out as well. So it's I don't know how to interpret that in terms of I mean reviews doing the work for me clearly because Haaland GV got a boost based off all the team news.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking right now I'm probably going to captain Holland just because look, it's already like I've already lost. I'm already sunk. It doesn't make a difference now.
Oh yeah.
So because I was thinking, so if Palmer has some fitness doubts, there's some chance he might get subbed early. Even if he's already had goal contributions,
Okay, fair.
there is some chance. That's the only.
But do you think there's actually genuine fitness doubts,
or
is this stuff that Enzo has to say? Like, for example, Arteta has to say this if someone doesn't go on international duty, right?
I agree.
Doesn't every
because
manager
you have to continue the lie.
Yes, you do.
Yes. You're absolutely spot on about that. I don't doubt that Palmer is potentially going to get close to 90 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that I'm thinking if there's some genuine injury doubt there and he subs him off, then there's not even there's not even EV there right now.
Yeah.
So it's like I'm taking a risk on both fronts, on the minutes front as well as the EV front.
Fair.
So do I want to do that? It's really about that. I don't care about EO clearly because I had a chance to go into Salah 2 weeks ago. I didn't take that chance. So not 2 weeks ago, 2 game weeks ago, which is 3 weeks ago. So yeah, here we are now, and like I told you that day, I don't know if you remember, but we are going to go on different paths, and I knew back then that the Salah path would be. And see, I knew is because I'm always a skeptic when it comes to my own team. So naturally, I would think that whatever I'm not doing is going to be more successful. But in this case, I really could see what was going to happen. But I didn't know it was going to happen to this extent. It's really been a terrifying ride till now.
Yeah. Right. So I mean, Palmer is still here, and I think he probably does deserve a part of the conversation because I guess if you own Haaland, fine, that's a pretty simple, clear-cut decision. I think you captain Haaland, to be quite honest, and I think there's like free risk there as well. With Palmer, I mean, there's a bit of risk involved, but actually, yeah, I guess if you believe in his minutes, would you ever, if let's say you put in the position of owning both Salah and Palmer, would you go against the Salah captaincy?
No,
you would never do that.
No. And that's just based on my beliefs have not updated enough from let's say 2 weeks ago when I was looking at the Southampton away fixture and thinking I probably have to own Salah for that game week.
Right. Okay.
And that's just based on that. I don't think enough has changed either way.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean,
what about you, by the way? Like, what are you going to do?
I mean, I would have probably done it if I felt like when I, adjusted the market odds slider, had a look at Rob T's sort of spread odds, and it didn't completely want to sort of, I guess, poo-poo the idea of going Palmer cap. It feels a lot worse looking at that than let's say how close they are on review, like Salah and Palmer. I do find it annoying to deal with in situations where, yeah, you own an overdog captain that's like 100% EO plus, but you're gonna be cheering against another one of your team players. I don't really mind it from the perspective of just like grabbing risk, but it always does feel weird in situations where, yeah, ultimately I know I have probably the best captain anyways in theory, and I'm still choosing to not captain him at a point in the season where I feel like I don't need, I guess, that amount of risk, but hey, I will consider it for sure.
So we'll see what happens by deadline. I suppose there's still some time to go. We only have a couple of questions, and appreciate anyone who joined us today. We did not give anyone a heads up that we were actually going to stream, just because this is the first time ever we've done a Friday night stream. I almost called it deadline because it's so close to the deadline. So yeah, appreciate anyone who is live right now. So do you want to go through some of the questions?
Yeah, rush through. First of all, hey Adam, hey Evil Monarch, Palmer Salah captain. I think we kind of discussed that, but I mean, it is a risk sort of question, right? If I wouldn't say it's free, and when you have like other, I guess, layers of data, sources of data that probably push you more to thinking Salah is very clearly and obviously the best captain. It's hard to sort of go towards Palmer, but I think you can do it if you are a little bit more, risk seeking. As far as Trent to Gabriel -4, I think you kind of have to do that move because Gabriel has such a great game. You're not going to necessarily net that move out perfectly this week, but if Gabriel and your next best non-Trent defender has a huge gap in terms of how good the expectations are for them this week, then yeah, the move, in my opinion, should bear out for you. You could also consider maybe another Arsenal player. Like if a lot of us own Gabriel, this again once again the question of whether you want to go into someone else who's lower owned. As far as that guy, he says he's gone Isak and asking to go Isak and locking himself out of Saka. I would definitely do that personally because there's so much doubt with Saka right now. If you have doubt over one of his best fixtures, which is clearly this game week, like if you were to actually look at the odds before we were uncertain or a little bit more uncertain about Saka, which is exactly where we still are now, half a day away from the deadline, I think this would have been one of Saka's best games over an overall strong run. But if you're missing it and you have Isak's best game here in his entire run, I mean, I would jump on that quite easily. Andrew said he's had an awful start to the season and he's going for Isak as a captaincy. And we showed Isak as a captain, to be fair. And I can understand wanting to chase the risk now. Obviously, the point to mention too is
too much,
this is still early in the season. This is still very early in the season. Like, I probably, I mean, like, I guess at your rank, you're not. I mean, it's nicer with Haaland now because people have been moving out of Haaland and it's going to be a differential ultimately, right?
Oh, for sure,
for
sure.
Yeah.
So it's almost like because it's a multiplication of people going out of Holland and Holland's EV going up, it just makes it more and more enticing to captain Holland.
Mm-hmm.
Also, on a side note, I was just looking at Palmer and Salah's EV, and Palmer and Salah have identical EV when Salah is 90 minutes and Palmer is 88 minutes, which actually means that it is a much closer decision than perhaps some people might have thought.
It is close. I think it's because Palmer, there was a bit of sort of tax applied post pressers, which, as I said, you have to make a judgment call, right? Like either Enzo's BSing or you generally think that's an issue. Not to mention that Salah has Real Madrid in the midweek game. Palmer has no midweek game, so that's going to be some sort of consideration for Salah's minutes. But as far as Mez, hope you're doing well. Good morning to you. So she's based in Australia, so thanks.
Yeah, it's good morning. It's almost good morning for me too.
Trainee's got no Salah, as do you. But I feel like if you have no Salah, you have Haaland, and you probably don't need to be praying when you have Haaland. Although I certainly wish I was a Salah owner for all those great game weeks where Haaland had prospectively good footballing games on paper. But Mez is actually undecided between JP, Welbeck, Evanilson, or Wisa. So I do feel like Wisa's end dries up quite soon. So yeah, you might get some short-term value from there, but I probably would still steer clear. Evanilson feels nicest in terms of, I feel like a lot of people are aware of him, but are still ignoring him. One thing that I would say that goes against Evanilson, in my opinion, is that Kluivert is actually getting a lot more minutes. And
exactly,
and I think he's on penalties. And so that takes a little pen share away from Evanilson. He still probably is prone ultimately to an earlier sub, depending on the game state. So I would still go for João Pedro. Like, shoot, I guess, the best theoretical shot with him, because I still think he's the best pick as long as he's alive and kicking a football.
I think the order she's mentioned is perhaps
I
the
would
order
probably
I would
agree.
Yeah.
Although I don't mind putting Welbeck side by side with Evanilson. The issue with Welbeck is we know that how good Welbeck is also purely dependent on JP's fitness, I guess, too. Like, that's a huge amount of pen share baked in for Welbeck over a good run of games. And it does seem like Brighton and Bournemouth have both improved a lot as a team from looking at team strength models. Andrew says he's bought Salah, so that's fine. Avnish says got stuck with Reece James. Is Colwell? I think Colwell's definitely starting. Like I don't.
He does. I
don't have any doubt on that. Mo confirmed the Disasi piece. Adam says, would you get Semenyo plus Isak in for -4? I mean, it really depends who you're shipping out at the end of the day. I can't answer that question without really knowing who you're shipping out. If you're shipping out a player who's not going to play ultimately, then quite an easy move. But it just depends. I am, for example, I mean, I'm sat here with Solanke. Have you thought about like a -4 at all this game week? Given we talked about how Bruno and Isak have such good games, like I guess in theory, a lot of people would look at those types of players as players that are worth a hit for because they have such a good game week and such a big gulf between the next best differential. But ultimately, you have to think about the medium to long term, and it's hard to justify a hit. I feel like as long as I'm comfortable with my players after this game week, which is exactly the case for me with Son and Solanke. Like they've got a bad game on paper, sure, but coming out of it, pretty good games that I'm happy to own them for.
You know what I just realized? I could do Holland plus Dibbling
Don't do that.
to Bruno plus Isaac. That would be crazy. I'm not doing that.
Who would you cap in that situation?
Palmer.
Okay, fine. That's not too bad. But why would you do that? I guess.
No, there's no reason. Because see, it's purely gambler's fallacy at this point, but also it's not gambler's fallacy because there is actually EV.
But
because even gambler's fallacy there is no EV. So it feels like a bit of both.
Yeah, fair.
Luther Blissett, our great friend, is online, so
true.
He's saying DB is washed, and I concur.
Yeah. Did you say that? Wasn't me.
I
this
did.
Time. Fair.
I did.
Transfer plans for this game week. I think mine are to roll, but who knows? I now apparently have a tendency to make a transfer. I actually might look. I'll be honest. I'll be honest with the chat here. I might go Hall or Colwell. I might also roll. You never know. But I think I will go towards the deadline. I'll probably wait and see if Luke can produce a great predicted lineup on Blue Sky. See if he thinks that Lewis will play in it. And once I think inevitably if Lewis isn't in it, I'm probably going to want to pull a trigger on Hall or Colwell. I just love a transfer. What can I say? I'm FPL Jack. Salah says, "Hey Fran, I love a gamble. Thinking of going from Rutter to Pedro Neto. I actually think that doesn't hurt as a move. Clearly, like when you move into a Chelsea winger, I think you just know that you're moving into like a gambler's den, and I hope you just come out of it unscathed. But that guy says Son and Solanke to Palmer and Isak. Yeah, I think those are great moves, especially if those are for free as well. Like that is such a beautiful swing, and you have two of the best captaincy options this game week, right? Selling two players who are playing Man City, although that actually is now a good thing as far as I understand.
I was going to say, is that even a bad thing anymore?
Aryan had a question in terms of his moves. I think I'd probably take the bottom path, but I wouldn't sell Bruno this week.
Yeah.
I mean, Solanke to Isak is quite nice. Yeah.
Yeah, it's 2 a.m. My brain is fried, so I'm just going to defer to Fran.
And I'll answer the last one. APN says, the 4 players I plan to move out are Pedro Porro, Foden, DSL, Solanke. I mean, if you're planning to move out of all of them, I think the only player that really could be sold this game week is maybe someone like Pedro Porro. DCL should start and have a good game. Foden should start and has a good game. Solanke, I think, is a fine hold if you want to. I'd probably move one of the Spurs players if you want to, because you're in one of these game weeks when you only have one free transfer. Ideally, the best situation you leave yourself with is just moving someone out of a bad fixture on paper into someone who has a great one, and I guess an equally good run of games after this game week as well, right? Because the thing about Solanke and Porro is ultimately when we get to next game week, they're not going to have a bad fixture on paper, and I know Spurs have just completely and utterly failed a great fixture on paper, but look, they're still a good footballing team. So that is that. All right, I think that's it in terms of questions in chat. Thank you guys so much for watching.
Yeah. Absolutely, thank you so much.
Play a bit of FIFA myself or EAFC 25. A slightly, I guess, close to vegetative game in terms of the state of it, but hey.
I'm glad I didn't invest this time around. I'm just going to enjoy not playing. Oh, thank you so much. That's the only right call I've made regarding football this season, because everything else has gone. I don't want to swear because we are now getting ad revenue. So yeah, let's leave it at that.
All right. Actually, subscribe as well. Thank you guys.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Talk.